Okay, thank you, brother, for the very interesting presentation. Well, with colonization, it involves race and a lot of emotions. So I just wanted to ask, when we decolonize, what effect will it have in different races in South Africa, because we are multicultural? What will be the impact that decolonization will have on each and every race?
Okay, just to answer that question from Badi. Well, as you know, in South Africa, we have basically two categories of races: the ones that were oppressed and the ones that did the oppressing. So, in the case of South Africa, all the non-white races were oppressed in some form or another. And the white race is the one that oppressed us. So I think that this process will have quite a maybe mostly negative impact, because the black man would say, it's good for us, we were oppressed. And the Indian, who is also dark skinned, would say, but we were also oppressed and we need equal treatment. And the colored person, who sometimes is darker, sometimes is lighter, would also say, we who are dark skinned and colored also want equal share. So I think it will have mostly a very emotive and negative impact, because everyone would want a share. But I think it's still a good process, because it should happen, and we should be able to hopefully come around the table and discuss how this process will go through. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Uh, uh, sure, brother. I really enjoyed the lecture. My question will be in terms of if the process of decolonization, for example, of knowledge has been achieved, and then we start creating, maybe as black, our own knowledge, or we go back to our own traditional knowledge. Will that not appear or manifest itself as some sort of probably a re-decolonization of whites in that sense, if I'm clear? Will that not, in fact, among whites feel like we are colonizing them, because this is the knowledge that they generated? So when we create our own, and then they'll also be expected to, subject themselves to that kind of knowledge. So will that not feel like we are colonizing them again? And if it's so, how can that be prevented?
Thank you for that question. Basically, to answer you in this way, there are two schools of thought, if you were to put it like that say, when a person has been a victim of colonization, they cannot colonize in turn, or they cannot be racist. Then there's another school of thought, which you just mentioned now, to say that even if you have been colonized or you are a victim of racism, you can also be racist. So in the context of South Africa, I think the response will definitely be like that, to say that especially, for instance, the white Afrikaner would say, no, we also suffered against with the British. And if the Africans generate their own knowledge, then it means then we will be oppressed again. So in the South African context, the only way it can be achieved is that we operate parallel to each other. And the only issue would be the issue of land and resources, for that to be shared equally. But I think in terms of generating our own knowledge system, we have to function parallel to them. But personally, I'm of the view that once you are a victim of racism or colonialism, you cannot be racist. For instance, just to quote Andile Mngxitama, he was saying that would the Jew from Germany be racist if he were to kill a German person? And most of the response that he got from the interview at SABC is that no. So the point that I'm trying to make is, if a Jewish person from Germany cannot be racist when they fight back against the Germans who oppress them, I'm also of the view that when we try to equalize the plane, then we must not be accused as racist because we were also victims. So what we are doing, actually, we are trying to correct and redress. So personally, I would say that I'm of that view, that when we do generate our own knowledge, we must not be accused of being racist because we are just merely trying to get back what we have lost. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, brother, for the presentation. My question is based on the Christianity. I think we all agree that there's an element of the fact that when the missionaries came to Africa with the gospel, they didn't just come with a naked gospel. They also came with their own, their own costumes and also their own traditions. So there have to be that element of reform theology and reform tradition that we have. So do you think the church today in South Africa in the 21st century is still under colonialism, or do you think we have passed that level of now we as African people view Christianity in our own African context in terms of tradition and all those kind of stuff? Or should we as believers or as African people decolonize from Christianity? Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Mustafi. Well, honestly, I think that Christianity today in South Africa is still very much Western. It still very much imposes itself on people who are non-West in their heritage. So I personally think that to the extent that it is possible, if it is possible, then it should be done. That we should take out those parts of modern day Christianity in South Africa that are westernized, that are racist, that do not go in line with the Bible. For instance, personally, I've always had an issue with the white wedding, for example, because I've had a lot of instances where people who are married by law and by the state are said to be not married because they did not perform the ceremony of the white wedding. So for example, things like that, I don't think they should be there, because even if you look throughout the continent, there's an inconsistency. A lot of missionaries that go to those countries that are underdeveloped, as they say, they don't normally enforce the white wedding culture as much as they enforce it here in our cosmopolitan way of life. They normally accept the way things are, especially if they go to a country where there is a chief and a king. They don't come and bulldoze that king. They try to accommodate some of the cultures there. So personally, yes, I think that decolonization of Christianity should happen, and it should happen as speedily as possible, because for years, I had an image of a white Jesus, and the white Jesus is not biblical. So we should not even have a model picture in our head. So I yes, to answer your question, yes, Christianity should be decolonized. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Good day. Thank you for the lecture, brother. My question to you would be in terms of the education system. What steps do you think our government, South African government, where we have a majority of black people, we have a rich black history, but our children are not knowing that history. What steps do you think our government can take in terms of rectifying that system?
Thank you so much, Dibuseng, for that question. The education system is a mess. You know, I probably shouldn't be saying that, but off the record. To be honest, the only way to fix the education system is to let the adults, the people who are currently in grade 10 to 12, pass through, because to a great extent, their mind is set in their ways. So I think we need to start from foundation phase all the way up to about grade 9, because the grade 9 mind is still confused. It can still be influenced. So the government, what they can do, firstly, they need to firstly redress some of the underlying issues, or the main issues, social issues, like the land question, like the redistribution, like the issue of identity. Because if they cannot address those issues, then they will never be able to fix the education system. Because as soon as a black child grows up knowing that I am black, there's nothing wrong with being black, I am wealthy because I have land, and I am good enough because of who I am, then that child will not succeed. This goes back to decolonization of being, because in this country we find ourselves where people are bleaching their skin, where they're trying to be lighter, because in this country, when you are lighter, you are treated differently. And education will never fix that. It is a situation where the government has to bring back the identity of the black person so that it can flow into our education system. Thank you.
Thank you, brother, for the presentation. Yeah, it was truly informative and eye-opening. Okay, my question will be based on closing the wealth gap. So my question will be, what other measures that can be put to address the issue of being excluded from formally being excluded from participating from the economic in the economic mainstream as Black Africans and sisters. So what I want to know is what measures can be put, and what can be, and even the time frame. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Thapelo, for that question. I think I'm going to answer you in a way that is probably not expected. Ne? My view is that if we want to participate meaningfully in the economy, there is no government policy that can do that. What I mean is, a policy on its own is dead. It's not alive. It's not a living entity. There's always a person behind a policy. So that person who formulates the policy has to give their identity to that policy. Now, let me give an example. 1918, yes, the Broederbond was formed. The Broederbond is a secret society for Afrikaners that was formed, and its main goal was to make sure that the Afrikaner person was not poor, basically. And they did everything in their power to make sure that the Afrikaner person is at least working the low-level jobs. In these days, they would call it working class. So politicians were part of the Broederbond, pastors were part of the Broederbond, teachers were part of the Broederbond. They contributed money and other things. So it created almost like a fund for the Afrikaner people. And that fund was used to lobby for elections, whether it's the 1948 elections or 1924 elections. That money was used to feed poor Afrikaner people, etc. And that is something a policy cannot do. That is something a person does. So in other words, to answer your question, what can be done is that we need to have a leadership, a government that is not afraid to be for black people on purpose, despite any opposition that might come. To say, this money is for black people. It's going to help black people without being unapologetic about it. And as long as you are black, you access that money, you do whatever you want. So that's what I think should happen. Another example would be the Land Act of 1913. The government created a law to say there'll be no more black sharecroppers. We will take away that system, and every black farmer who was a sharecropper would now be a slave to the white farmer. Just like that. So we need something like that in order for black people to participate. And then we cannot be accused as being racist because we are correcting. And just an insight. Did you know that before the 1913 Act was passed, black people had the opportunity to get back their land? They had that opportunity. And the 1913 Land Act actually put that away. It scrapped that away because there were those wealthy white farmers who felt that black people were competition. And they actually went to the government and lobbied to the government to say, these people are competition for us, we need to get rid of them. And then the government passed the 1913 Land Act. So yeah, to answer your question, I think we need to be as radical as that. Yeah.
First of all, thank you, brother, for this lecture and opportunity to work with us. My question is probably like a follow-up to what Brother Tabelo just asked. I mean, what you are saying makes sense, and that is indeed what we should do. But I feel like our government is so corrupt right now that, you know, these ideas are wonderful, but I feel like there's no one who's going to actually be there to make sure that these ideas, policies, and laws and everything, that they are actually being implemented, and not just, yes, we have a law, we have this policy, we have that, but no one is actually doing anything about it. Currently, with this much corruption, how would it be possible? Who would make it possible? Who would implement it?
Thank you for that question, Schaba. Well, unfortunately, as we stand now, there's no one there's no one. However, there is a pattern. There is an outlay that we can hope that some black people can follow up on. For instance, you have people like Patrice Motsepe. You have people like, he is a billionaire, our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, etc. You have people who have the means to make significant change. But the problem is, it's not because those people don't want to. It's because those people can't. They don't have the faculty in their head. Why? Because for them, black consciousness, blackness is not important. Because if it was important, then they would risk everything, just like people like Steve Biko, Robert Sobukwe did. They would risk everything to make sure that the black people of this country are actually are doing well. So for now, the only thing that I can say is that we need to be prepared to be uncomfortable. Meaning, if it means that this country goes the route of Zimbabwe, we need to be prepared for that, because that's the only way that we can emerge as pure as possible. There is no country in the world, there's no first world country in the world that is currently where it is without some form of war. Whether you look at the United States, whether you look at China, they all come out from nothing. China, for instance, was worse than Zimbabwe was. But because of that turmoil, China emerged as pure Chinese as possible, so that they can unite around the identity of a Chinese man. When the British colonized China, the Chinese people used to refer to the British as those dogs. So there was this oneness amongst Chinese people to say, we will not allow anyone who is not Chinese to come and divide us. As long as you are Chinese, it's fine. So that's why China is where it is now. Not because of its economy or whatever. It's because of the unity that they have and putting a Chinese person first. That's why they are where they are. As same with the United States, same with Britain, same with France, it's the same thing. So what I'm trying to say is, if it means that the economy falls, bread becomes 1,000 rand or whatever, it's okay. As long as we are willing to say, whatever will come out of the situation, it will be a purely authentic black African thing, then I think that's good. Yeah. So, Chabane, as I would like to after presentation, it's about video one on its own, and then the question in the video. Yeah, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you, brother. I just have two questions. The first one is, what role do the old women, old men in the village, and the children there in those marginalized areas, what role could they play in this decolonial project? And also, or is it like this thing for the intellectuals who are at the universities there, or the people there still do have a place in terms of this thing? So now also the second question was on the issue of uniting around an identity. With the international, if I can say, movement, of decolonialism and all that. So if we are uniting over probably our African identity, how do you then answer the issue of or the accusation of us being separatist? Will that not, in fact, bring the accusation of being separatist and all that? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Spamantla, for that question. The first answer is that the role of our abokoko nabomkulu in the rural areas, for example. I think that if one really looks into how things were done. For instance, the example of the architecture in the Rondavel example. Mostly the women and people from rural areas who are older, of the older generation, they are not educated. but they were able to create things that benefited them, that were technological, because the rondavel is seen as a technological advancement. Their role really is to, in a sense, re-educate us as to, or maybe in modern day terms, they call it transfer of knowledge or transfer of skills. For us to go to them and understand how they did it, and we take that skill and adjust it to our time. Just to give an example, there's a man who sells what is called khemere, Kasuthu. Ginger beer is not really, doesn't do justice, but that man took what was known commonly as the khemere and he extracted the skill, packaged it, put it in a powder form and sells it to us. So that means that he must have learned this recipe ya khemere from somebody from the older generation, and he took that skill and made it his own. And the unfortunate part, though, is that there's no one who really was compensated for the idea ya khemere. So no one is benefited from passing on that skill. He just saw an opportunity and privatized it, if you will, and he's making his money. So to answer your question directly, the role that they can play is the transfer of knowledge and skills, but then in return, we need to make sure that they come up as well if there's any financial benefit from whatever they're going to pass. For instance, rondavels are still being built today, and they are still being built in suburbs and all those kind of places. But no one has yet patented the rondavel. No one owns exclusive rights to the rondavel. And no one has said, no, let me go back to the communities and try and give them the power. Just one more example. There's a lady, I forgot her name, but she's an old woman, a Ndebele woman. She's making millions through Ndebele paintings. She has been to the United States. She has placed... Yes, her name is Esther Mahlangu. Thank you, Chap. Esther Mahlangu is using age-old knowledge systems when it comes to art, and she's using that to benefit herself and her family and the Ndebele culture, so that whoever sees that culture can connect it to the history of the Ndebele culture. So another way to answer your question is for us to do that with our the older generation, with their knowledge and their skills. And I think that it could go a long way into changing our thinking and our knowledge. Thank you. And the second answer, you see, the problem with being called separatist, unfortunately, is that those countries that are not first world are deemed as developing. And in the eyes of the first world countries, we will always be developing. We will never come to their status. So just to go back to my previous point, I think we need to take the risk of being accused as separatist, of our economies being shut down, so that when we emerge dictating the terms of trade, dictating everything. Because if you look at South Africa, for instance, if South Africa was to go down, all the capitalist countries will leave and they will say that South Africa does not participate in the globalization and the global economy, etc., etc., etc. But in this country, we have gold, we have platinum, we have coal, which can do a lot of things. And if we find ourselves in that situation, we can do what is called an intra-trade. That's what China did. When China economy had collapsed, they started trading amongst themselves. China sold diamonds to its own people for 20 years before it actually exported diamonds outside. So by the time diamonds were exported outside, people were rich in China. We create our own currency. Doesn't matter. As long as we are able to produce food, as long as we are able to produce those minerals, we are okay. Eventually, our minerals will cause an explosion effect, where people will see how prosperous we are and are going to want those minerals, and then we'll sell them in our terms. So to answer your question, I think we should take the risk of being called separatists as long as we are able to say that we will stomach whatever horrible things are going to happen in this country as long as we emerge as pure as possible. Thank you. Yeah, Bishop.
But you had the brother. There's no one. No one. No one.